Hello everybody and welcome to another video. In this video, I basically just want to continue the previous videos in which we talked about returns. Now we are going to basically solve some simple programs that deals with returns. So I basically created a class that looks like this. The link is in the description if you guys want a blank version of this class. Um, so basically, the idea is we are tasked to write different methods, and these different methods perform different behaviors. Some of these methods have to return something. I'm pretty sure actually all these methods have to return something. And basically, the idea is we will basically use our knowledge of returns and what we know so far about returns and how we have to catch them to be able to produce nice behaviors. And these are some nice applications that deal with return. So let's go ahead and get started. So basically, the idea is the first class that we are tasked to write is write a method called sum that returns the sum of any two numbers given two numbers. So right away, I know that I need to be able to create a method. It has to be called sum public static. I'll go ahead. I don't know if it's void yet. I'll just go ahead and do a dot dot dot, and I'll call it sum. And then notice how it says the sum of any two numbers given two numbers. So whenever you see something like given two numbers or takes in two numbers or you will be passed two numbers, that basically is the idea of parameters in which we've been talking about and dealing with for the past couple of videos now. So basically the idea is that we are given two numbers. So I could say int, I could say num1, which is number one, and I can say int number two. So basically, this is how parameters are. If you're a little bit fuzzy on parameters, I would go ahead and rewatch the videos on parameters before this video because we will use parameters in this instance right here. So what does the method say? It says write a method called sum that returns the sum of any two numbers given two numbers. I should have specified this is supposed to be a whole number. I'll go ahead and write it. These will be whole numbers. Always a good idea whenever you're in a coding interview to always ask the person that's giving you the coding interview, hey, are the two numbers going to be doubles? Are they going to be ints? Or are they going to be negative numbers? So it's always a good idea to be able to clarify that with the interviewer. So in this case, I want it to be, I'll give you whole numbers. So for example, like 10 and 20 or 15 and 16 or 30 and 20 or negative 10 and 8. So what does this method say? That returns the sum of any two numbers. So I know the sum of any two numbers, if they're ints, what's going to be the return type? The return type is going to be an int. So what is this method going to return? This method is going to return an int. So what do we put right here? An int. So what does it say? That returns the sum of any two numbers given two numbers. These will be whole numbers. So how do we do that? So basically the idea is I know I'm going to return something. And what is that something? The sum of any two numbers. How do I find the sum of any two numbers? All I have to do is add those two numbers. So I can just say return num1 because I know those are going to be a whole number and num2. Basically the idea is num1 is going to be a number and num2 is going to be a number. Let's say the numbers was like 10 and 20. So I'll be past 10 and 20 and what's the sum? The 30. How did I get that? 10 plus 20 is 30. So that's just basically the idea of this method. We can go ahead and test it out. We can just say int sum 2, and then I could just say this is how you call it again. You have to call the method again. You have to catch the return type. So whatever is being returned has to be caught. Otherwise, you lose the value of the return, kind of like the water balloon I talked about in the previous videos. So let's say I want to find the sum of 10 and 20. So sorry, 10 and 30. I'll just go ahead and system that out. Println sum 2. Let me go ahead and compile. I'll go ahead and compile and run this program. Let me go ahead and run it. So the sum of those two numbers is 40. I can go ahead and get more fancy. I could say 30 and 30. What's the sum of 30 and 30? 60. What's the sum of 76 and 76? What's the sum of those two? So that's just basically the first part of the program. That's this method works correctly. I tested it out. I could also test it with negative numbers. I can say what's the sum of -1 and 76. So that's going to be 75 if you guys know math. So let's go ahead and test it. 75. There you go. So that's just this method right here. Nice and simple. Nothing too complicated. Let's go ahead and work on the next one. So what does this class say? Write a method called salary. So I know right away I'm going to write a method, public, static. I don't know what it's going to return. I'll go ahead and call it salary. And then I don't know if it takes any parameters. I'll just leave it blank for now. And it says write a method called salary that takes somebody's salary and reports how much they make in a month. So as we can see, we see a keyword that takes somebody's salary. So that means I'm going to be passed a parameter, a salary. What's a salary? A salary is like a number, and it's always going to be doubles because sometimes you could have like $367.75. That was your salary for this week. You know, so that's going to be a double. I'll call it double salary. And so basically, the idea is this method is supposed to report how much they make in a month. So the idea is, how do we know how much somebody makes in a month? So we know the salary of somebody is always calculated yearly. For example, if you guys have your tax return, your salary is calculated yearly. So what do you do in order to find how much you make in a month? So what you do is you divide by the number of months there is. So for example, if you make 100K a year, you divide that by 12. 100K divided by 12, I don't know, that's like, I don't know. I'm not even sure what that is. I can't do math in my head. But the idea is you will always divide by the number of months in a year to be able to find out how much you make in a month. So, for example, like I said, if I make 100K a year, in order to find out how much salary I make in a month, I need to be able to divide by how many months is in a year. And how many months is in a year? That's 12. There's 12 months in a year. So basically, the idea is all I have to do is return salary divided by 12. 12.0, or I can do 12, it doesn't matter because the computer is going to deal with doubles and it's the same way if you have a double. So this is basically like the idea. If I say, like, let's say I make 100K a year, that's basically how much do I make in a month. So we can go ahead and do the math. We're going to do my calculator, how much that will be. 100K divided by 12, that's 8,333 and some cents. So that's how much I made in a month. So that's just this method right here. And we need to figure out what this returns. So basically, if I divide a double by another double, what is that going to return? That's always going to be a double. So what's its return type going to be? A double. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can go ahead and test this method the same way. I'll go ahead and copy it. And because this method returns a double, let me comment out this. This method is going to return a double, and I'll say double month salary in a month. I'll call it salary in a month. And I'll call this method right here. And let me go ahead and pass in a salary. Let me go ahead and pass in 1,000, 1K. Let me pass in, is that 100K? I'll pass in 100K right here. And then I will go ahead and just print that out. So I'll just say system.out.println. Now I'll go ahead and just compile this and run it. Yeah, so that's just basically the number I was doing in the calculator right here. So that's just how much I made in a whole year. So let's say I made like 75K a year, so 75. Let's say I made like 75K, $1,200 something, and then like 98 cents. Let's compile, run this. So that's just basically how much I made in a year. It's usually rounded, so I probably made $6,260.25. That's how much I made in a whole year. So that's just basically the idea of this method right here, just taking somebody's salary and returning how much they made in a whole year. So now let's move on to the next method. So this method says write a method called square that takes two numbers and returns the square root of those two numbers. For example, if you guys don't know what square is, let's say I had 2 and I squared it, that's going to be 4. Let's say I had 4 and I squared it, that's going to be 16. So let's go ahead and write this method, public static, and then squared is going to be called square, and it says it takes in two numbers. So basically, whatever you see takes, or you'll be passed or given two numbers, blah blah blah, is going to be some sort of parameter. So I'm going to be given two numbers. Again, you can assume that these are going to be whole numbers. That's what I wanted in this video. So I can say int, I can say num1 again, and I can say int num2. It's going to be really similar to the other method we wrote before, which is taking two numbers and finding their sum. This is just taking two numbers and finding the square of those numbers. So let's just do that. So all I have to do is return num1 times num2, and that will basically give me the square of two numbers. And what is that going to return? That's going to return an int. So that's this method right here. Nothing too complicated. It's just testing your ability if you're paying attention to the first method. I'm giving two numbers and I squared it. That's going to give me the square of that number. So if I had 8 squared, it's going to be 8 times 8, whatever that is. Um, so that's just the idea. Um, I feel like this method is kind of like worded weirdly. I could just give you a number and I could just say, given two numbers, find the square. It doesn't make sense actually. Let's actually say write a method called square that takes in a number, and returns the square of those numbers. Because that just doesn't seem like it seems logical, you know? If I give you like 8 and 8, I said find the square of those two numbers. That's just kind of weird. Okay, I kind of messed up on that one. I apologize, guys. I actually want you guys to take in a number and just return the square of that number. So if I give you 8, for example, it's going to be 8 times 8. Or I could have done the other way. I could have taken two parameters. What I could have done is I could say 8 and then 2. So I could just say 8 times 8. No, that doesn't make sense. If I can do 8, 8, I can pass it 8, 8. But this way would be easier, I assume, because all you have to do is just do return num1 times num2. Again, I apologize, guys. Kind of um, I kind of bit myself and I kind of misguided you guys. But the idea was in the earlier I had two parameters, and I felt like that was kind of awkward because in kind of math, like you don't see whenever you're finding the square of a number, you don't get two numbers. All you do is just get one number, and what you do is just square. So, for example, if I had 4, all you do is 4 times 4. If I give you like 10, all you do is 10 times 10. You don't take it two numbers. For example, you don't do 10 and 10. Find the square of 10 and 10. You know, I mean you could, but you could just do 10 times 10. But I feel like this way is just easier because this follows the laws of math. So yeah, that's just the idea. It's always a good idea to always clarify with your interviewer because sometimes they can make a mistake. In this case, it's not necessarily a mistake; it's more like a logical issue. So yeah, so let me go ahead and test this. I'll say double, and I'll say test math. Let me just find the square of what's the square of 10, and let me go ahead and print it out. I'll go ahead and print this out. Pages to be test math. Let's compile it. The square of 10 is 100. Again, I don't know why I stored it in a double. That was also a mistake. You guys should have caught me. I mean, there's nobody in this class, so nobody's catching me right now. But if you guys had a class, live audience, I would have been caught a long time ago. I could find the square of 8, so that's going to be 64. That's just the idea of this one. Nothing too complicated. You could have it the other way, but I feel like that's just like kind of doesn't make sense. Like somebody reading it from a math standpoint, be like, "What? You have two numbers. You have to find the square of two numbers." I mean, you could like just take those two numbers and square it, but I feel like this way is easier because all you do is just take the number and just square it. You know. So that's just this method right here. Now let's move on to the final method. So let's see what this method says. It says write a method called emotions that returns the phrase I am, and then it tells us what underscore. What is the underscore? It's always a good idea if they don't give it to you in an interview. Always ask them, like I talked about. So what does it say? It says where the underscore is an emotion past. For example, if past happy, and this method is called, your method should return the phrase I am happy. So basically, the idea is I'm going to return, in this case, I am is obviously a string, and I'm going to be passed in a string. And all I have to do is return whatever is being passed, the emotion. For example, in this case, somebody passed in happy with exclamation mark, all in caps. So what is this method supposed to return when I call it? It's supposed to return I am happy. So basically, if I passed in angry, this method is going to return I am angry. So that's the idea of if you guys don't already see right away, it's okay. But this has to deal with something as known as string concatenation, which we talked about. I think it's been a while back. For those of you guys who need a refresher, if I take two strings that I want to add, let's say I had I am and I said I am and then plus joke. So what this will equal is I am joke. So if I just take a string and I add another string, it's just going to combine it into one big string. Um, so that was just the idea of string concatenation. It's testing our ability on that. So you'll often see that in many programs that you write. It deals with many different types of things. It's always a good idea to break it down. So let's go ahead and break it down. So what's the first thing we need to do? It says write a method called emotion. So I'll go ahead and write that. I'll call it public static. In this case, I'm not going to write the dot dot because you guys already seen it. This method is going to return what? I am is what? It's a string. So this method returns a string. And then it's called emotions. And then it says where emotions is passed, for example, write a method called emotions that returns the phrase I am underscore where underscore is the emotion passed. For example, I know that I'm going to be given an emotion, so I have to pass that in. So I can say string emotion. I'm going to be passed that as a parameter because that's the key hit, and then a squiggly because that signifies the end of the method. And what do I have to do with this method? All I have to do is say return I am, which is a string, and then put a space, and then plus the emotion. So what this will do is basically do exactly what the behavior says. So it's going to say I am, and then add a space, and then combine the emotion. So this, let's say I passed in the happy, for example. When this method is called, what will happen? It will return I am, and then plus the emotion. In this case, the emotion is happy, so it will pass in happy. That's just this method right here. So we can go ahead and test it out. Nothing too complicated. It just takes a while to like really see what's going on. String test. I'll call it test this time, and then I will go ahead and do system dot out dot println test, and let's go ahead and compile it. Some of you guys already see what's going to happen. That's because I was just testing you guys. I did that on purpose. Basically, what you need to do is you need to actually pass in a string. In this case, you can't just do this because we talked about when you call a parameter, that's just a refresher on parameters from before. But the idea is you need to actually pass in a value for the parameter. That was just me just brushing up. What I like to do is I always often like to brush up and review things sometimes. So this is probably a good review. Never just pass in a string of bullshit. You actually have to give it an actual value type. So in this case, if I run it, this was from before. I am happy, and I can just type pass in angry. Uh, I'm angry. I can also say I am Hulk angry. Hulk. Hulk angry. Probably Hulk angry, right? So I am Hulk angry. That's just extremely angry. So that's just the idea of returns. I hope you had a lot of review on returns as well as learned some new things. So this will conclude this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe. Like always, I'll see you in another future video. Take care.